You know that feeling when you watch somebody keep making the same bad decision over and over, and at some point you stop being surprised and just wait for impact. That was Ubisoft in January 2026. Not a rough quarter, a bad launch window, or even one game bombing with everybody overreacting for a week. I am talking about the moment the market looked at Ubisoft, the pipeline, the leadership and the strategy and basically said, yeah, no. We do not trust you anymore. Because the stock did not just dip, it got smashed. Around a third of the company's value vanished in a single session, and suddenly, Ubisoft was sitting at a market cap of roughly €616 million. This is a company that was worth more than 11 billion back in 2018. That is not a slump, that is a public collapse in confidence. And the wild part is, if you have been watching Ubisoft for years, this did not feel sudden at all. It felt late. That is the thing people get wrong about company meltdowns online. They treat them like plot twists, as if one day the vibes are fine, then boom, disaster. But most corporate collapses are not plot twists, they are slow leaks. The floor does not fall out in one day. It rots underneath you for years, then one morning everybody notices at the same time. And Ubisoft has been rotting for a while. A lot of people still talk about Ubisoft like it is the old version. The scrappy giant, the open world machine, or the company that used to pump out huge franchises and still leave room for weird ideas, side bets, risks and occasional magic. People still react to the logo like it carries old memories of Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell, Rayman, Far Cry, Rainbow Six and Prince of Persia. There is history there and there is goodwill there. That goodwill has been doing insane amounts of unpaid labor. Because once you strip away the brand nostalgia, what have players actually been reacting to for the last several years? Delays, formula fatigue, live service chasing, bloated design, premium pricing and trend following. Corporate language trying to explain why something obviously broken is somehow part of a strategic transformation. And look, players are not stupid. They might be patient longer than investors, sure. Fans will give you second chances, sometimes third, but eventually people notice when a publisher stops making games that feel wanted and starts making products that feel engineered. That is what Ubisoft ran into. Not just a financial problem but a trust problem. In January, management rolled out this big reset with a new structure and 5 creative houses. It sounds clean, focused, and like the kind of thing consultants say while nodding at a slide deck nobody will remember in 6 months. And on paper maybe you could sell that as accountability, specialization, and sharper execution. Fine. But then, you look at what the company actually did. 6 games cancelled, 7 delayed, and forecasts cut. About €1 billion in expected operating loss for the fiscal year. Roughly 650 million tied directly to delays and cancellations. Guidance pulled, more cost-cutting and restructuring. All these phrases sound responsible until you remember they only exist because the original plan blew up. That is not a reset in the way normal people hear the word. That is a company admitting the machine no longer works. Then you get to Vantage Studios, which is where the whole thing gets almost darkly funny. Because Ubisoft took the 3 brands the market still trusts to make money, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six, and put them in this protected unit backed by Tencent money. Tencent put in about €1.16 billion for a 26.32% economic interest, which effectively valued that unit at around €4 billion. Now, stop there. If one carved-out piece of Ubisoft is worth around $4 billion, but the whole parent company was trading around $616 million, what does that tell you? It tells you the market thinks the rest of Ubisoft is not just weak. It thinks the rest is dragging the good stuff down. That is brutal. That means investors were basically looking at the company and saying we like the crown jewels, but we do not like the castle, the guards, the plumbing, or the people running it. And honestly, can you blame them? This is where the conversation gets bigger than Ubisoft, because this is classic platform-era corporate brain. When a company loses faith in its own ability to create new hits, it stops behaving like a creative company and starts behaving like an asset manager. It protects the few things that still print money, throws every other idea under a bus and calls it discipline. But players can feel that shift. You feel it when a company stops trying to surprise you and starts trying to segment you. You feel it when every decision seems built around retention, monetization, pipeline efficiency, and franchise durability, instead of whether the game is actually exciting. That is why the cancellations hit so hard. Prince of Persia, the Sands of Time remake getting axed was not just one project dying, it became symbolic. Because that game had already turned into a running joke about development hell. Reboots, setbacks, silence, and reshuffling until finally, the answer is, never mind. And it was not just that. 3 unannounced original IPs were also among the cancellations. That part matters because when a company starts killing off new ideas first, it is telling you exactly how scared it is. New ideas are risky. They need patience, conviction, and leadership willing to take a hit now for relevance later. Ubisoft at this point looked like a company that could not afford imagination. And once a publisher gets stuck there, something ugly happens. It starts living off memory and becomes a museum gift shop for its own past. That is the creative side. Then you get to the human side, which is where the whole thing gets even worse. Because every time one of these giant publishers crashes into a wall, somehow the people steering the bus still talk like the real issue is everybody else not pulling hard enough. Ubisoft had already been cutting jobs and closing or restructuring studios before this January blow-up. Then the larger overhaul kept pushing that pressure downward. And that is always how it goes, right? The grand strategic vision fails at the top, but the consequences arrive at the desks of developers, artists, QA producers, and support staff. The people actually making the stuff get treated like adjustable numbers, then layer in return to office mandates, which Ubisoft had already been fighting over with staff and unions. And this is where the audience at home instantly understands the mood, because we have all seen this movie. Management makes a series of expensive, high-level mistakes, then suddenly, there is a speech about discipline, efficiency culture, collaboration, and being together in person. All the usual polished nonsense. As if the problem was never bad leadership, or bad bets, or trend chasing. No, apparently the problem was somebody answering emails from their apartment. Come on, workers are not dumb either. They know when they are being blamed for structural failure. They know when reorganization means anxiety, when efficiency means cuts, and when they are being asked to absorb pain, so leadership can say it is taking decisive action. And that breakdown in trust matters more than companies admit. Because you cannot build great games in an environment where everybody feels like they are one bad quarter away from becoming an expense category. You cannot get risk-taking, honesty, experimentation, and strong creative judgment out of a culture built on fear. You get defensive design, safe choices, committee thinking, and games that feel expensive and empty. Which is pretty much the Ubisoft complaint in one sentence. Then, because apparently the satire writes itself now, Ubisoft kept leaning into generative AI experiments. During this broader crisis, new NPCs, teammates, and more talk about adaptive characters or AI-supported play. And look, in a vacuum, research is research. Tech experiments are not evil by default. That is not the point. The point is timing and trust. When your company is bleeding credibility, cutting projects and shrinking confidence, the audience does not hear innovative prototype. They hear another executive distraction, a shortcut, or that these people still think the solution to bad game design is adding one more layer of tech instead of fixing the core experience. That is the psychology of it. Once trust is gone, every new initiative gets processed through suspicion. And Ubisoft earned that suspicion, because what players have been telling them for years is not complicated. They are tired of maps stuffed with chores, games designed like checklists, and spending premium money on products that feel padded, managed, and overbuilt. They are tired of that weird feeling Ubisoft games started giving off, where everything technically functions, but very little feels alive. That is why this collapse hit harder than a normal stock story. The audience and the market finally aligned. Usually those groups move at different speeds, with fans reacting emotionally and investors reacting financially. January 2026 was the moment both sides landed in the same place at once. Why does this exist? That question is lethal when it starts hanging over a company's output. Why does this game exist? Was this project approved? And why is this map so huge? Why is this mechanic here? And why does every decision feel like it came from a business model first and a creative idea second? If a publisher cannot answer those questions in a way that feels human, people check out. And Ubisoft used to have an answer. Years ago, when the company was fighting off takeover pressure and talking about creative independence, it could still sell a story about identity. Not perfection, but identity. It felt like a game company run by people who at least understood what made games matter. That version of Ubisoft feels gone. It was not stolen or hijacked, but worn down from the inside. Too many trends chased, too many lessons ignored, and too much faith in scale. Too much belief that brand recognition could replace inspiration. So, where does that leave them now? Alive technically, stable enough to keep moving, thanks partly to Tencent's cash and the enduring strength of the few franchises people still care about. Assassin's Creed can still carry a lot, Rainbow Six still matters, and Far Cry still has value. But survival is not the same thing as recovery. Recovery would mean more than chopping the company into cleaner shapes and praying the good brands keep carrying the weak decisions. Recovery would mean leadership actually understanding what people stop trusting. It would mean making smaller promises and delivering them. It would mean fewer gimmicks, less chasing, less bloat, and less pretending every game needs to be a forever platform. It would mean building games around what feels good, not what looks scalable in a presentation. Most of all, it would mean remembering a brutal truth. A lot of this industry keeps trying to outsmart. Players know when you made something because you believed in it. Players also know when you made something because a spreadsheet needed a reason to exist. That is the real story of Ubisoft's collapse. Not just bad numbers or market panic, but the bill finally arriving for years of confusing size with value and output with meaning. And that is why this matters beyond one company. Ubisoft is not just a cautionary tale for gaming, it is a cautionary tale for any creative business that starts treating audience trust like an infinite resource. It is not infinite. You can burn it slowly for years, hide behind famous brands, and buy time with old goodwill. You can even survive longer than people expect. But eventually reality gets bored of waiting. And when it catches up, there is no magic patch for reputation. There is only the work, and whether people still believe you know how to do it.